Welcome to Decision Makers, our frequent conversations with policymakers, prognosticators, and the experts who offer the latest insights and perspectives on a wide range of issues. This session, we have a conversation with Amy Turner. She is the director of the city's climate law initiative at the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law at Columbia Law School. She joins us as part of our continuing Decision Makers Climate Equity Series, which we produce in partnership with the Smart Services Coalition. Good to talk with you, Amy. Thanks
Thank
for
you for
being
having
here.
me.
All right, excellent. So, you recently assessed what's a growing elephant in the room, right? This is the question that's on a lot of people's minds. They're asking it, and you address it in your latest Sabin Center blog, which is entitled "Climate Cities, Climate, and Trump: An Early Research Agenda." So, how bad will an incoming Trump administration be for federal environmental policy if we're looking at this on, say, a scale of 1 to 10?
Well, we know in the first Trump administration that federal agencies rolled back over 100 environmental protections. And so we expect to see that kind of action again. So this involves taking regulations, rules that were set out for various aspects of environmental protection and rolling those back, sometimes replacing them with newer, weaker rules, or sometimes just eliminating them altogether. So that, we can kind of expect to see that again. That'll happen across agencies. But it's, certainly I think we'll see a repeat of the last administration in that regard. And we've heard the incoming president and some of the people allied with him talk about wanting to pursue a similar deregulatory agenda. It'll look perhaps a little bit different this time. There are some different rules out there. There are IRA programs, Inflation Reduction Act programs, that face varying levels of vulnerability. So we may see some weakening of some of the Inflation Reduction Act programs as well, which is a little bit different than the regulatory space.
Yeah, so you mentioned IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. Some people know it as the Biden climate plan, right?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
so we know IRA is going to get hit hard. But other Biden era climate related policies that are going to get hit the hardest?
Yeah, I mean, um, we've heard, the then candidate Trump talk about wanting to rescind IRA dollars, and we've heard some talk about, various pieces of the IRA that folks don't like politically. It's hard to say how hard it will be hit. Certainly, there will be damage done to it, but it might be more surgical than like a really blunt force attack. Much of the money from the Inflation Reduction Act has been obligated, meaning there are signed grant agreements between the federal government and and grantees, whether those are states, cities, tribes, community organizations. So a lot of that money has been obligated, and would be difficult, if not impossible, to actually claw back. But we could see some damage done to programs where money has not been spent. We could see some damage done to tax credits, to some of the loan guarantee programs, that kind of thing, in the IRA. It won't be as blunt as perhaps some incoming policymakers would like it to be. Other areas that I'm watching pretty closely will be in the deregulation space. So, changing a lot of the IRA would involve legislation, but the federal agencies, are the ones who actually implement major environmental laws like the Clean Air Act. So I'll be looking for what I expect to be rollbacks of the power plant rules that the Biden administration finalized this year, as well as a whole host of vehicle pollution rules. And in particular, the ability of the state of California to set more stringent vehicle emission standards than the federal standards, which shapes the market in really important ways. Those are some of the rules that I'll be watching in particular that could make some of the ways that we've seen Biden era environmental protections actually come about. Some of those things could be rolled back by a Trump administration.
Oh, well, so do we envision any significant pushback from Republican House and Senate members who have district and states that have benefited substantially from those IRA funds and some of those other Biden climate era initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to read the political tea leaves too much, but certainly there's good reporting that a lot of the money from the Inflation Reduction Act has gone to Republican districts. And I certainly have, advocated to the local governments that I work with and speak to that, if they like these programs, whether it's a grant program or a tax credit, they should let their representatives know so that they can take that back to Congress when they're negotiating future tax and spending and appropriations bills.
Mm, mm. Hey, so Amy, and you sort of hinted this a little bit in your blog. I think in terms of the time frame for rolling back some of these regulations, rolling back some of these landmark climate initiatives or laws that Biden was able to push through. So how long would that all take? What sort of time frame are we looking at if we're looking at it in terms of like one Trump term? He's only able to do one last term, but how long would all this take?
So yeah, rollback is a little bit of a squishy term, right? It's meant to capture a lot of things. If there is a final rule that came about through the Biden administration or any other administration, if it's a final rule that went through the whole rulemaking process, it was published in the Federal Register, went through a notice and comment period, et cetera. In order to repeal that rule, the agency has to go through a rulemaking process again. So it has to publish in the Federal Register that it's plans to repeal a rule. It has to open up a notice and comment period, and then it has to, consider that feedback and then finalize the repeal of that rule. So that's going to take about a year to the extent there's a final rule in place. There are other, aspects, other sorts of things that we might colloquially call rules, but they're not rules in the administrative law sense. So there could be guidance, like there's a lot of guidance that comes out of the IRS for the tax credits, the renewable energy tax credits. That would be a little bit easier to roll back than formal rulemakings. For rules that were finalized in the last 60 days of the congressional session. So we think that started sometime in the summer, but we won't know for sure until the Congress ends its term. That's easier for Congress to roll back those rules through a law called the Congressional Review Act that allows Congress to rescind final agency rules that were finalized during the last 60 days of the congressional term.
Mm, mm.
So
Oh,
it really varies, I guess is the long and short of
right,
it.
right. We'll see. We don't have a crystal ball on it, but
I think we're going to see, I guess the other thing I should add is, executive orders are, they're executive orders are sort of a way of setting policy by the president, right? So
Mhm.
President Biden has a couple of really important executive orders on environmental justice, including the Justice 40 commitment. President Trump can just rescind that executive order. There's no formal
Mhm.
rulemaking process there. And it's very common for presidents to, either repeal or just not follow executive orders from previous presidents. I wouldn't expect him to follow that executive order. And so I would expect the Justice 40 commitment to go away.
Got it. Got it. So, uh, looking at all of this in another way, is there a way to frame climate laws in such a way that, one, it makes it more beneficial to the corporate interests or business interests that Trump typically likes to answer to, right? Or, make it seem like, he's the one that's created these new innovative climate laws. Like I've heard a lot of conversation around that. I've had some conversations where people are saying that, you know what? He doesn't like the IRA, not because it's climate related. He simply doesn't like the Inflation Reduction Act because he didn't create it. So, is there a way for advocates to frame it in some way to make it seem like, hey, this is more business friendly, maybe even more fossil fuel industry friendly? And two, this is also something that makes it seem like it's brought to you by President Trump.
Well, I think we're seeing some of that. There's a lot of, a lot of folks are writing these days about how renewable energy is, a good business proposition, right? We want to keep these incentives because they help bolster energy independence. They help bolster the businesses that engage in them here in the U.S. It's not something I'm expert in. I've certainly seen some of the thinking around it, and I think that to an extent it makes good sense. I do worry that we race to sort of make these macroeconomic arguments about the cost of clean energy, for example, and we miss the implications that Trump's environmental rollbacks are going to have in communities and in cities.
Mhm.
Because when folks are talking about the cost effectiveness of wind energy, or how, the renewable energy tax credits incentivize domestic clean energy production, they're not talking about how these programs play out in cities. And I think that a lot of those programs are going to be among the most vulnerable. The economics don't pencil out in the same way. And I think we're going to lose a lot in terms of protections for communities on the ground.
Yeah. Speaking of cities, you talk a lot about what cities can do, how city governments can respond to all of this new administration. And you also talk about how, where you press cities to move very fast on ensuring that, contractual agreements are not breached, to find, to plug any holes in those contracts, to make sure that they're crossing legal T's, dotting legal I's, right? So how do cities respond to all of this?
Yeah, so this is the number one thing that I think cities and others, other grantees, whether states, tribes, community organizations, whatever it is, anyone who has gotten been awarded a federal grant from a federal agency, in the sense that the award has been announced, but the contract has not been signed. The number one priority for those grantees should be finalizing those agreements before January 20th.
Mm,
We do not know what's going to happen after that, but we do know that signing a contract, that's a legally binding document, and it's a really important legal milestone. So
mm,
having that contractual agreement binds the federal government to disperse the dollars for those grants, to the grantee. And so that's just an extremely important thing to focus on. Whatever internal hurdles there may be to getting those contracts signed, that's something that should be focused on, really right away, getting through those hurdles to get the grant contract signed. Once you have a contract signed, or as you're in the process of getting it signed, it's also going to be really important to be able to demonstrate compliance with that contract. So a lot of these contracts, like, they might disperse money in tranches. So you get a little bit of money at the beginning and a little bit of money later, right? Or they might be reimbursable grants. And we don't want to give a future agency any hook on which to say that the grantee is in breach of contract. So this is also a really good time to get internal processes in place to be able to demonstrate, how and where money is being spent, how and when deliverables are being met, and any other terms of the contract that could give rise to a federal agency saying, hey, you're in breach of this contract. Now is a good time to really just get a documentation process in place to be able to show that you're not in breach of that contract.
mm, mm. Now, for a Trump administration that's this resistant to anything climate related, environment related, I mean, are they really going to, meet those obligations? I mean, can't they like hold up disbursement of funds? I mean, is there always the risk or the danger of that?
There is always that risk, yes. I mean, I think, having a contractual arrangement, you have a legal entitlement to the other party performing under their
Mhm,
contract. And
mhm,
so, I would hope that the federal government in any instance would honor its terms of a contract, but also, you would have legal recourse. You could sue to have them perform under the contract, right? What is also worrying to me, though, is, we're hearing a lot about staffing of federal agencies. So we've got this, Department of Governmental Efficiency that's apparently looking for ways to, basically just get rid of as many federal employees as possible. And I think we're going to see real implications of those sorts of efforts in the EPA, as well as other agencies focused on the environment. And
mm,
so it could be just like slower to get your disbursements, right? If there are fewer folks in the office that manage your grant program, they're not going to be able to get through those disbursements as quickly, or they might try to claim that you're in breach of contract in some way. So I do think there are going to be ways for folks in agencies to gum up the works if they want to. I'm also really hopeful that a lot of the really wonderful career staff will stay on and keep everything moving. I mean, we were so lucky that so many really dedicated and knowledgeable career staff stayed on through the first Trump administration, and I think really they really prevented a lot of additional damage that could have been done, but wasn't, because they were at least able to continue maintaining the programs that they were responsible for.
Mhm. You, in your blog, the Sabin Center blog, it didn't seem like you talked about states, however, and I'm wondering why you left states out, and particularly state legislatures and governors out of this ability to respond to this incoming administration and how they manage anything climate or environmental related. So can't cities and states team up?
Absolutely. Yes, that's the ideal, right? I work mostly with cities, so that's who my
Okay,
blog post
got it.
was at. But absolutely, there are, lots of states that are really interested in figuring out how to move things forward. The U.S. Climate Alliance is an alliance of governors who are really interested in carrying as much climate policy forward as possible. In a dream scenario, you have cities working with their states to implement federal programs, to apply for tax credits, to share resources. A lot of cities, I will say though, operate in state environments that are not friendly to them. So a lot of cities operate in states where the state legislature passes laws to preempt things that they want to do, or makes it more difficult for them to raise revenue or get funding for things that they need. The state may not be willing to recognize climate change at all, right? Cities really operate in different dynamics. Some of them will have really strong state partners, and some of them will not.
Got it. Got it. Hey, real quick, I got to go back to that question about grant contracts
Mhm.
and making sure that cities, and then we just talked about states and everyone, just and organizations enforcing all of that rigorously. But we're facing a new administration, a president that has a reputation for not respecting the law. And then you have a Supreme Court which seems to support that. So how do we manage that? How do we that puts us in a bit of a bind there, right? When you have a president-elect, you're going to have also cabinet members, and then you're going to have like their staffers, folks, and a Supreme Court. Nobody seems to have any respect for maintaining kind of basic standards of law, just based on what we've seen, based on what we've seen unfolding.
Yeah, I think we will have some. We have had some disappointing results from the Supreme Court, right, that have sort of very much changed the way environmental law and regulation work and will continue to work. Um, I wouldn't expect that a contractual dispute between a grantee and a federal agency would get to the Supreme Court, for example. That would be play out in a much lower court, if at all. So I don't know. I don't have any more insight into how exactly that would play out, but it would not be before the Supreme Court.
Got it. Got it. We've been talking with Amy Turner. For more on her work, you can go to climate.law.columbia.edu. And once again, we've been talking with Amy Turner. She is director of the city's climate law initiative at the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law at Columbia Law School. Thanks again, Amy, for your time. That concludes this episode. I'm Charles Ellison. I'm your executive producer and host for Decision Makers. Raven Robinson is senior producer. We want to thank our partner for this particular episode, the Smart Surfaces Coalition. For more information on them, go to smartsurfacescoalition.org. And in the meantime, you can find this episode and more while you're, of course, subscribing at thebnote.com. Thank you, everyone. Take care and be safe.